I'm going to give you a bit of what about IDL and why we're doing this program, and then we'll Afreen take it over and share you the schedule from here onwards. So we at Indian Debating League, our company is Ogly, but one of the vertical we have is IDL Indian Debating League. We currently host cool tournaments across India. The biggest one we host with ISDS, Indian School Debating Society, which is primarily, you know, IPL of debating, that we have teams from each and every state of India. And then we take these teams to kind of national camp. And that was a starter. Then we are looking at hosting debating at IITs across India. This time we are also looking at doing it the current parliamentary building, which will, become old and this and that. But while doing this, so what we realized that for us to really improve the Indian debating circuit, because I myself debated prior, in 2015 when I was in IIT Delhi. From this day to today, at least at the universities circuit, we have debated more than
Tomorrow we're supposed to dress up as some character. I don't.
and you want to mute yourself. So we're looking at creating a pool of good candidates adjudicator, which will improve the circuit. Also, we are looking at doing a couple of things. We are looking at bidding for WDC in the coming years in India in 2025, along with Hadar. So we will be needing really, really good level of adjudicators, which can, judge at that panel, or maybe, the in rounds. And that's why this is a starting program to really train the adjudicator at par with the international judges at the international circuit. And this is like the beginner, basic program that we're starting. We will have more interaction with you. We'll invite you, many of to you, our tournament, whether it's online, offline. And I guess already you have debated with us prior. And we will take also few teams from the university circuit to kind of give them scholarship, work out with them, providing coaching to prepare for 2024 and 25 WDC. That's what we are looking to do out of this program. And with that, Afreen, you can take it over.
All right. I mean, I would just want to just like give a quick introduction towards like why we figured out that's a problem. So like we host tournaments every month and we need around like 50 judges every month in order to run those tournaments. So there's a high dependency to run like tournaments on these judges, but we used to fail to get like good quality judges for the tournaments. So as IDL and as Ogly, what we aimed at was just like getting good quality of judges, simply because we wanted like good feedback towards the new generation who's coming up and debating. But I think it's just like good tournament quality that we wanted to address to begin with. I think there is so much more like focus on training people with respect to speaking and becoming a better debater that we oftentimes are not just like forget the idea of like becoming a good judge. So I think that's really, really important, which is why this session. So this session primarily is something that Hadar suggested that we should take in order to have a broad understanding of what adjudication is and what inherently you should know before you attend live sessions with Hadar. Because I mean, I understand that it was supposed to be we training you about everything in terms of adjudication, but I think there's so much more in terms of experience, in terms of just like you having more exposure towards the resource file that already exists. So I think like, I mean, a lot of it is just so accessible online that we just tend to undermine the importance of it. This is particularly is going to like incentivize you to read them, but also watch them in the first place. So I welcome you all formally to the Adjudicators training program powered by Ogly X IDL. The structure of this module is going to be, the structure of the entire training is going to be in 3 modules. First is going to be orientation and introduction session. That's going to be by me. So I'm going to like just briefly touch about like what is expected from an adjudicator, how exactly are you supposed to get oral adjudication. Even before that, so just like from the basic scratches, like how are you supposed to take notes? How are you supposed to analyze and understand what these clashes are? How do you evaluate those clashes? How do you evaluate rebuttals and so on and so forth? I mean, there are like, I have deliberately left some of the things because I would give you like resource material so that you can go back and like refer back to those material in order to like understand these like small details and intricacies of it. So I mean, I would incentivize you to like read much more and like watch much more videos on it for sure, because like I'm telling you, all of it exists online and it's really, really good material. The second module is quiz. I know the material exists online, but we don't have incentive to read or watch all of it, right? So I think the quiz essentially is going to be based on the orientation and resource material that I'm going to give you, and it's going to be like linked in the document itself. But also like some of it is going to be probably covered by today's session as well. So it basically is like a push towards like the existing material that exists to just like read upon it, but also it's a precursor, right? Oftentimes or not, we read and watch a lot of like resource material that exists. However, we don't understand it and we're like just not able to implement it well. But we don't understand as to what are these like areas where we want to actually improve. So what we would do by this quiz is basically understand as to what are the small details that judges oftentimes are not fail to understand or recognize properly. Which means that obviously there are going to be some questions that are going to be like majorly like answered as wrong answers and stuff like that, right? So we would take that data, give it to Hadar, and we will specifically work on those like areas. So probably like it could be like how to evaluate clashes, how to like evaluate the weighing of the debaters and stuff like that, right? So in different sections, according to the responses that are going to be given by you, we're going to like evaluate as to what is the debater baseline as of now and what can we improve on by using like good quality like judges, like people who have like been best speakers in WUDC and is also going to like chair like be chief adjudicator in WUDC 2025. So I think we would need to and we would want to utilize the best of the talent. I want to obviously like make this one like statement really, really clear. We aim to make it accessible, yet we want to ensure quality of interactions with like a good demand of like interaction and like attention and dedication from you. Because I mean, the live session is going to be about you talking and not necessarily just Hadar talking. All right, let's just start with the very basic of like adjudication. 5 things. First, know the structure of format well. Most of the formats that we actually debate on from OGLI and in general in India is 3: BP, AP, and WSTC, British Parliamentary, Asian Parliamentary, and World School Debating Championship. So what we want from you is that just know what is the flow of these speeches and how do you, and what is the time limit of these speeches. Oftentimes they're not, I'm just like very shocked when I see, and when I go to tournaments and they're like, are we doing reply speeches? I thought it was just obvious that you're going to do reply speeches to begin with, right? I think there are so many like misconceptions about debate structure, etc., that it just becomes very messy in debates and tournaments, right? Unless and until tournament specifically tells that there are going to be no reply speeches, or let's say there are going to be no like back half speeches, I think it's just obvious that you're going to like follow the original format in the first place. I'm making this clear because OGLI oftentimes are not, do not, in our tournaments, we don't use reply speeches. So we make it really clear that yes, it is modified WSTC, we're not going to have reply speeches. So just know the structure well, and this is really important insofar as you're chairing the rooms, etc. The second thing is recognize the difference in the speaker scale. This is important because I've seen debaters and judges often like just like messing up the speaker scores and speaker scale so bad that British, like they will be using like British parliamentary scale and Asian parliamentary, and the same with WSTC, which messes up the entire like scores with respect to each speaker that exists in the tournament, right? With some speakers are inherently more lenient, and some debaters are some judges are inherently more lenient, and some are strict, which just like harms the ability of another like speakers to actually go ahead and break in tournaments. And I know like if you have been through that, I think you would know like how much it hurts, right? So we don't want like judges to like use their own speaker scale that is like illusionary in their head, that all the speaker ranges start from 75. So I'm going to like start marking you from 75. So the first, like, if it is better than that, I think 76. That's not how it works. A good judge always like refers to the speaker scale, because tournaments would give you speaker scales which are like WATC scale, WUDC scale or WSTC scale, and they are specifically made so that you can mark the teams fairly. The third thing is like understand what an average reasonable person looks like, and understand as to where the limit comes in. There is a difference between an average reasonable voter and a person who knows a lot about a particular thing. So we would discuss, and there are obviously like more things to like dwell upon as to like where can you use this like knowledge that exists with you, and where should you not actually use the spec knowledge that exists with you, right? So most often than not, do not use the spec knowledge to evaluate, credit, or discredit arguments that are being given by the judges. And this is called interventionism. So where can you use the interventionism, and where should you not use interventionism? Lastly is that I think this is also like one of the things, and specifically isn't necessarily very like very very known to Indian circuit. But if you go outside, there are things like paradigms, right? So judges are like told to write their paradigms as to what is their, like, what do they expect from the teams, etc. So it could look like, do you like good structure? Do you like good like accent? Do you like good speech, etc. Right? So it's just to make sure that are you as a judge inherently convinced more by a particular accent or a particular way of talking, a particular structure, etc. You shouldn't be in the first place expecting all of it from the speakers, because you're supposed to be very, very neutral as much as possible. So I do understand some people have inherent biases with respect to ideologies, opinions, etc. But you're not supposed to keep them in your mind when you're evaluating the debate, because you're like a plain canvas, and the person who is debating is supposed to tell you all of it, and you should just evaluate it based on what happened in the debate room, not what happens outside the debate room. Moving on then, the first level, and if you have gone through like things which are existing in like the online era as to what's like, what are the resources available, you would know what this is. This is tracking debates. Let's start with like how exactly are you supposed to note the speeches, and how exactly are you supposed to maintain your notes while the judgment is in proceed, it is proceeding, right? So first thing is, what you need to understand is there is a specific aim of note making. I think you make notes because humans do not have a good memory. Even if you do think you have a good memory, there are things that we tend to like not remember or forget, right? So what you're supposed to do is understand that, listen, I'm probably supposed to like make notes of things that are being said by the speakers, and this necessary in terms of like what exactly should you note, and what should you, or what can you essentially remove from noting, right? Three things that you should absolutely note is, first, what did the speaker say? Second, how did they prove it? And last, what is the response to that material? What you're necessarily supposed to also understand is this nothing but assertion, reasoning, and the response, the rebuttals to these things, right? Oftentimes than not, you would not be able to figure out the clear distinction as to what is their assertion and what is their reasoning. So what people essentially end up doing is that, what are the flags that they actually made in this in their speeches, and then what did they say after that? So this, like, there are different ways how you can figure out as to what is the reasoning and how did they prove it and what is the mechanism behind it. I think the third thing that you also need to understand is that these notes are for you, which means that you should be able to understand what you wrote. I mean, there are different ways how people actually go ahead and like make notes. You can make it on computer. If you want to make it on like sheets, you can do so. But understand what is like, and what is the most like convenient way, and how do you understand it the best. So it's on you, and not the things that people can tell you how to do it, right? I think also with respect to things which are understandable to you, people have different ways to go about it, right? It could be like you using different pens. So it could be like, for arguments, I'm going to use blue pen. For POIs, I'm going to use red pen. For a response, I'm going to use green pen. So, I mean, you can technically write in blue pen everything. But I think if you want to make it extremely clear for yourself, you can use different pens. People tend to highlight significant parts of the speech as well. So you can use highlighted in order to highlight speeches. But if you are on Google Doc, I think it's just much more easier. Use abbreviations. It's your notes. I mean, you're supposed to use your abbreviation that you understand. So at the end of the day, I know, and people like complain a lot. I don't understand my own handwriting, but I like note it down. So I mean, just understand, if your handwriting is just pathetic as me, just like use laptop, use like tabular form and laptop, and then just note it. The next thing, I mean, there are different ways. Again, it should be something that you should like experience it, or you should practice it, experiment with it, and then decide what works the best for you. For example, some people have the divide in 3-sheet way, which is like, first is like positive material. In another sheet, you would basically write POIs that are offered and taken, and the other sheet you would write all the responses that are being made. The other way is dividing paper in 2 or 4. So if it is AP, you would write on the left side all the material that is being given by government. On the right side, you would write all the material that has been given by opposition. So I mean, there are different ways how people actually like write notes. Practice, experiment, think what works the best for you, and how you have been able to contribute the best in panel discussion, and how you're able to like utilize these notes the best, and then go ahead and implement it the best. For me, what works the best is that I make notes on 2 sheets. One is the main note where I like write every single thing in detail, and then there is another sheet where I write only the flags of the arguments and the most important arguments, so that I know that these are the things that I'm probably going to discuss in terms of panel discussion. But when I think there's something that like I inherently missed during the panel deliberation by listening to other judges, I go back to my detailed sheet and then evaluate as to, okay, this is probably something that I did not like actually give enough attention to. So this is something that works for me. So you're supposed to use your own methods as well. There are 4 videos that you're supposed to watch. This is Korea WUDC Ads training, and it's really, really good. All of these 4 people are extremely like good in terms of their own like speaking careers, etc. So you should probably, and judging careers as well. So you should probably watch as to how they have tracked, how it has helped them, and how you should essentially track debates as well. These are the 4 videos that I would absolutely recommend. Then, and this also like the module 1 of Korea WUDC training. The next one is, and very important when you want to judge, is clashes. The thumb rule of clashes is 3 things. First, you would want to understand as to what is the clash. So, I mean, the easy way to understand as to what is a clash in a debate is the material that has been substantially disputed upon. It could be like, hey, efficiency is much better in our side of the house. So it could be a clash of efficiency. Somebody could be like, hey, it's not urgent to do a particular solution. The clash could be urgency. Is it necessary to do it in short run, or we can do it in longer run as well? So there are different things that people disagree upon, or people think that that accrues better in their side of the house. That's something which is called clash. So you'd first want to understand and evaluate as to what the clash is in the first place. The second thing that you'd want to do is who won the clash. So there are different methods of evaluation of who won the clash, but I'm obviously going to deal it later. But the third thing is that after you have recognized as to which team like won which clash, you would now want to understand as to what clash was the most important, or which clash was the most important. I mean, there are different ways to, again, understand as to which clashes are the most important. It could be the impact of the clash. It could be the team's analysis towards that clash, etc., etc. But what you need to understand is that it's not necessary that clashes are quantitative in nature, which means that if one team has won 4 clashes, another team has won 2 clashes, that doesn't automatically mean that the one team that has won more clashes has won the entire debate. So this is like really, really important, because after you're done with like understanding this is the clash that has been won by this particular team, you're then supposed to analyze which is the most important clash. If the team that wins the most important clash, again, has won the debate. Moving on, how then do you like evaluate clash and recognize as to who won the clash, right? I think firstly, I mean, you would want to know as to what extent and what is the way how they have like proven the contention, and what are the logical links and explanation that has been given. So the first thing that you would look forward to and try to find is the material that is supported or used to support the claim, the logical links, the mechanism, the likelihood and of the outcome, etc., etc. But just understand, did they analyze it well? Or what was the extent of the analysis? Now, once you know the positive material that has been given, you would now shift towards the response of it. So what was the response made by the opposition? What was the response persuasive enough? Was the impact and what was the impact of that response? Did it disprove the original claim that was being made, etc., etc., right? So disprove could be like a couple of things, right? Just like disproving the likelihood of like a particular outcome and so on and so forth, right? So understand what is the analysis given, what has been the response, what is the outcome or implication of that response. Just because and this is the biggest mistake that I've seen with most of the judges, just because judges are just because teams are saying that and the response to that is, how is that true? How is that true? I mean, just questioning the claims of another team isn't necessarily response. So don't consider it as a response unless and until they prove or disprove that argument. So just questioning certain statements isn't considered as response per se. It's just a call out, but a call out necessarily isn't a good call out to begin. So they're supposed to still give a positive material to substantiate that call out. Lastly, what is the extent to which the response harms the original claim? And this is important in order to understand this, right? For example, proposition gives material X, opposition responds to that material. Well, in order to now, and just assume that this is done, this is how it is, right? And there's no further response or no further rebuilding, etc. If this is true, what you're supposed to analyze and understand is that whether there were preemptive rebuttals by proposition in order to already rebut the claim that is being presented by opposition. So there are a couple of things that you're supposed to then see even in responses. Were there preemptive rebuttals? Were there rebuilding after the rebuttals, etc., etc. So it's never, and just remember, it's never a two-way game of hey, proposition said this and opposition said this, and therefore I gave it to proposition, or therefore I gave it to opposition. It's more often than not like this. Proposition said this, opposition responded to that, proposition then tried to respond to the response, but then I felt that this particular response wasn't that significant, or why did that response not efficiently take down the counter response that was being given by opposition. That's how it makes it. It's very back and forth procedure. It's not proposition said this and opposition said this, because there's so many ways how different other speakers also elaborate on the same things that was being presented, that were presented by the initial speakers. Moving on, how then do you evaluate the rebuttals? I think in order to evaluate the rebuttals, you need to first understand the different kinds of rebuttals that exist. One is contradicting rebuttal, and another is competing rebuttal. Contradictory material, the contradicting response, is also known as pure rebuttal. So it could basically look like challenging the incorrection, logical analysis or premise or outcome of that particular claim that has been made. Then the second kind of rebuttal is semi-rebuttal, which is that, hey, what propositions is saying is probably true, but it can probably exist in our side of the house as well. So what you do is you just say that, hey, if the outcome is X, that X can also exist in our side of the house. Or if the problem is this, I think this, and the solution is this, I think we can have better ways to solve the same problem. So it's basically when you contest on exclusivity rather than you saying that, hey, it does not happen in your side of the house, right? So a pure rebuttal or a contradictory rebuttal essentially takes down the argument. However, a competing rebuttal competes with the argument, which means that if it is a competing argument or rebuttal, you're supposed to then evaluate as to who proves it better or who proves the plausibility of that outcome better, right? For example, if they're contesting on the idea of hey, I think we're going to solve discrimination better, but yes, this is not the way how you solve discrimination. So proposition has their own policy and opposition has a counter policy. Then you would see as to who has explained the plausibility of that policy working better, or who has proved to you and given you more analysis towards where they're able to achieve the solution better and stuff like that. So there are going to be different metrics then in order to evaluate as to who wins that clash in the first place. Oftentimes, teams would give you different metrics to prove as to why they are doing it better as opposed to opposition. But there also are chances when teams won't tell you as to why they win that. In that scenario, you're supposed to analyze and see the links mechanism, the propensity explained, the exclusivity explained, etc., much better. So just read into the analysis that has been given by the teams. The next thing, there are different other responses as well. Three other responses then is one, flipping argument. So what you say is that, listen, what you're saying is that this outcome happens on proposition, but on opposition, we're saying that this outcome rather happens in our side of the house. So you flip that argument and you also claim it in your side of the house. The second is negation. So you basically say that what you're saying as an outcome necessarily or is less likely to happen in your side of the house. So you basically reduce and remove the plausibility of happening a particular thing. The last thing is mitigation. So it does not essentially take down the argument. It just diminishes the importance of the argument. And this happens most of the times when you basically weigh in certain clashes and happens a lot of the times in web speeches or second speeches, could happen in any speech, right? So what happens with mitigation is that you do not necessarily take down the argument, but you just diminish the importance of the argument. In order to then, so that basically means the argument still stands, but it just doesn't stand when the judge is basically evaluating as to who is the winner, which means that yes, that argument is probably there and is existing, but that isn't going to be the case for you to win the debate to begin with. So just diminish the importance of that claim. So I think what basically is the implication of all these three arguments is basically this. You know what is the strongest type of response. You also know as to how you basically understand as to what is the less persuasive or convincing rebuttals. But at the end of the day, what you would want is just understand that oftentimes than not, rebuttals are also not something which are explicit, right? Which means that like oftentimes than not, constructive material of like the proposition could also like contain things which are basically like so can you please mute whoever is speaking, please? Cool. So what you would want is just understand that like it's not always targeted rebuttals like saying that, hey, proposition said this and this is our response to that. What oftentimes would happen is that you would see things like framing and characterization also working really like strongly against the positive material of the other side. So you're also supposed to like consider all of these things in order to understand what the material is and how does it break the constructive material from the opposite side. Again, I think just existence of a response is not good. You should see the quality of the response that is existing. Again, I think the one more thing that I want to like make clear here is that a lot of times one team spends a lot of time in like building that argument. However, it's not necessary that opposition is supposed to, or the operants are supposed to use the exact amount of time in order to respond to that, which means that opposition could like literally break one reasoning from that argument and can still win the debate. So it's never on the quality of that argument and it's never about the quantity of the argument and quantity of rebuttal. It's more about what is the quality of rebuttal that you're imposing towards your opponents. All right, but also like remember that often like rebuttals don't exist in isolation. So once rebuttals have been made, you should also understand and figure out as to what's the outcome of the rebuttal. Did it take it down? Did it diminish the argument? Or did it just like mitigate the argument? So do not trust the judges, like do not trust the teams when they say that, hey, we have taken down that claim completely or we have mitigated it, because oftentimes they're not, teams just lie. So you have to use your own brain in order to understand as to what was the outcome of the rebuttal rather than like just believing plainly as to what the teams are telling you. Next is basically moral frameworks. This is important specifically because people think that practical arguments are more important than principled arguments. That's not true, because what you're supposed to like do or like expect as a judge is let the teams tell you as to what is the more important moral framework and in which you should be judging the debate. If teams prove to you that the framework as to which you should judge the debate is utilitarianism, where more people are happy and you are basically sufficing the needs of most people, surely like practical arguments could be more important. However, it's not necessarily true that like just by the virtue of like saying that, hey, there are practical implications of this argument and therefore this argument is more important. This is not an analysis or a convincing like framework or like a convincing weighing for you to understand that, hey, this is the framework that I want to buy in. I think what is essentially bad with respect to the judging community is that we assume that things like practical arguments are more important intuitively, and therefore we are likely to also like buy in and vote for the teams which give you practical implications. However, what you need to see is moral arguments and principled arguments could be equally important insofar as like teams have told you that what matters the most is just, let's say, like just principled framework that we like actually like run in. Again, teams would convince us to buy this particular like framework is more important than the other. So again, you should not be like using this inherent bias in your head that, hey, practical arguments implicitly or explicitly is more important, right? And therefore, like the team that is giving me practical arguments is more important. So do not let, and from the next time, whenever you see whip speakers or second speakers in debates telling you that, hey, they only ran principles with no practical arguments and therefore they've already lost the debate. That's not true, and not let these teams like get away with these claims. That's not an inherently as an untrue statement to begin with, right? Next thing, and this is about like to what extent you can intervene in the debates. So it's just the middle ground, right? You're not supposed to be like the person who knows about everything. So you don't want to have too much knowledge and you won't want to have too little knowledge as well, which means that you're supposed to be an average reasonable voter who reads newspaper, who has general knowledge about like what happens around the world. So like there are different ways how you can intervene, but there are like specific balances with respect to under intervention and over intervention. So a couple of times, so things like, hey, proposition gave this characterization, but I know as an average reasonable voter, this characterization is bad. However, opposition never challenged it. What should I do? All of it are all of it should be a question that should exist in your in your head. Should I credit it? Should I discredit it? Should I just judge the debate the way how it is happening? Should I just be okay, a definition that has not been challenged by opposition becomes the definition of the debate, therefore I'm just going to do the debate the way it is? All these questions I'm not going to answer, because there are specific videos that you're supposed to watch. And this is a really, really good thing that I would want to realize and understand as well. Because if somebody told me, okay, there's a balance of intervention that you're supposed to maintain, I wouldn't understand. So you should probably be very incentivized to watch all of these videos. So and specifically, I think the second module of 4-year WUDC has specific things such as they would show you the debate, they would also show you the panel discussion, and they would then show you as to how the oral adjudication has been given and delivered. So just and specifically watch the video Goldilocks interventions in order to know to what extent you can actually intervene in these debates, and to what extent you can discredit or credit these arguments, which you think are inherently wrong, but nobody questioned it in the first place. Moving on. And this is something I'm not going to deal with specifically because I think more on the idea, because I think most of you all would know about it. I think there's specific things as to where is moral necessary, where is counterfactual necessary, and what is fiat, and what is the extent of fiat that you as a judge should know. For example, where is moral necessary? Is it this house believes that motion? Is this house would motion? You see oftentimes our teams would push burdens of opposition did not give you the model and therefore they lose the debate. So how much is a model necessary, and where a model is necessary is also something that you should know inherently as a judge. And again, where is counterfactual necessary? Okay, I'm obviously not answering these questions because I want you to figure it out, but the thing that I would obviously explain to you is what is fiat, which means that I think the problem with then most of the teams is that they either over assume fiat or they just presume that there is no fiat with the opposite team, which means that if proposition claims that they have a fiat, opposition also has the same fiat or equal fiat, which looks like, hey, the policy is going to be implemented with the clauses that they discussed, which means that the resources that are there with proposition are also going to be the resources that are going to be with opposition, right? So you can't just be inequitable with respect to the fiat, which means that opposition in policy debates can give you a counter policy, which probably is using the same resources and same capital. Then you would probably want to look out for things like what is the opportunity cost, what is the cost benefit analysis, etc. Because now they're using the exact same resources, having or reaching the same solutions. You would now want to know, okay, if it is reaching the same solution, who does it better? So these are the things you would probably want to see as well. The next thing that I would want to discuss is with respect to characterization and definition. What should you define, and what is characterization, and what is the characterization that could be given credits to? For example, and this is something that I also figured out and teams don't essentially recognize, is that we think that if a team is squirreling the debate, we should just question them on the squirrel, and therefore we would essentially be winning the debate. So yes, if a team is squirreling the debate, which means that they're diminishing the burden of the debate, you should basically call them out. And you would probably want to debate on the actual motion and the terminologies of the motion. However, if you think that squirrel essentially helps you in the debate, you can take it out to your leeway and just debate it on the squirrel, right? Which means that it's not necessary for you to always question the squirrel if you think it's okay for you to if you think it works better for you. For example, in one of the debates, proposition just characterized the debate happening in India. I thought on opposition, it's just necessary for me to question that out without even recognizing that probably if this debate is happening in India, it's good for us, right? So I just questioned that, hey, this debate does not necessarily happen only in India. It happens in most developing nations, etc., etc. But the problem with that is that, yes, that's fine. And I also gave a counter definition to that. But the problem is that I don't necessarily have to do it, which means that if a squirrel exists and opposition did not question it, the squirrel becomes the definition of the debate. Nobody can now deviate from that, right? It means it becomes the debate, or it becomes the definition, and judges are supposed to basically judge the debate on that. But second is, if you don't want to actually debate the motion on the squirrel, just definition, give a definition challenge. But even when you're going to go ahead and give definition challenge, there are three things that you need to absolutely remember. First, definition challenge can only be given by leader of opposition, which is the first speaker in opposition. But secondly, while you're giving the definition challenge, you're supposed to first justify as to why like there is a definition challenge to begin with. And thirdly, you're supposed to give a counter definition, which means that if you're actually challenging the definition, then it becomes as to like, what definition am I judging on if there is no definition to begin with? You won't want to leave the entire debate ambiguous. Therefore, you would want to give a counter definition, which is very, very necessary. If you absolutely want to give definition challenge, please do these three things. But even after that, what necessarily ends up happening, and this like more into like what would happen if you would go ahead and give a definition challenge. DPM would try to respond to the definition challenge, would try to concede to the definition challenge. A lot of things could happen. But you as a judge, you should basically evaluate the definition challenge, which looks like, do you buy into the original definition given by proposition, or do you like buy into the challenge definition by the opposition? I've seen like debaters in the web speech go ahead and like do the weighing as to which definition you should actually buy into if nobody actually concedes into one definition even by the end of the debate. So I think then you should probably also look into the weighing and see as to what is the more charitable definition you would want to judge the debate upon, right? So I think then, I mean, it's just important for you to note, and the key takeaway is that accept the bad definition if it is not being challenged, which means that you shouldn't essentially intervene in such cases. I won't discuss specifically on what are the motion types and how exactly are the burdens and what government or opposition should do. I think you guys can read it because this material is going to be available with you. But I think the best thing and the best way how it is explained is in WUDC Judging Manual. So please read it. It's like a gold material and Bible for debaters. So it basically explains as to what is policy, what is this House believes that motion, this House prefers, this House enacted. Again, you have three videos and one manual that you should probably read, specifically manual for motion types and understanding what fiats and models are. But there are 3 videos that you can surely watch. 2 of these videos basically tell as to what is the burden on proposition and opposition and different kinds of motion. And then one is about like definitions, the extent of fiat and models. Please do watch it. Then let's come about like try to understand what are back half comparisons. I mean, back half comparisons would probably be relevant only for closing debates, which means that British parliamentary debates. But I think in general, if you want to like even in Asian parliamentary debates, if you want to understand as to what is a good extension as a speaker, that's something which is relevant to you. I think what you need to first understand in order to like recognize what these back half comparisons is first, what is an extension to begin with? So extension could be anything in terms of new example, new reasoning, new argument, new impact, etc., etc. But just because a new extension exists on closing does not necessarily mean that you are going to win, which means that, yes, it is sufficient for you to win, but not necessary for you to win just because you have an extension, which means that, hey, you would probably want to see as to what is more important material in the debate, what is more impactful material in the debate, and what's more relevant material in the debate, and then give the credit towards that, right? But lastly, what are the metrics of comparison with respect to this extension material? First, what is the extent of analysis? Which means that, again, I mean, extent of analysis is always comparative, right? Who did it better? Was closing who did it better? Or did opening did it better? So then you would probably want to make comparative and then see which extent of analysis do you like better. The next is impact, which means that how important is the argument and how important do you think the claims are in this argument. The last thing is relevance to the debate, which means that you would essentially think that just because a particular thing has been most contested upon is probably the most relevant. However, if teams are in isolation, for example, opening government and opening opposition contest a lot about this one thing, but closing government comes up and like gives you a new understanding of, okay, this is also one of the arguments that could exist. And then closing opposition again buys into the idea of opening government and opening opposition. According to the idea or the rule of heavy contestation, you would probably think that, hey, that's the most relevant to the debate is what opening government, opening opposition, and closing opposition is doing. But rather, if closing government tells you in their speeches as to what they are saying is most important, I think you can also buy into what they are saying as the most important metric of the debate. Right? I mean, oftentimes or not, yes, closing would extend on their opening, but it's not necessarily filling the gaps. It's probably adding to the gaps, right? Which means that closing's material cannot independently exist without opening. In that scenario, you would essentially understand the more important analysis or the premise is probably being set up by the opening teams, and therefore you would want to credit opening teams for that. Now coming to the diagonals, and again, so towards like British parliamentary, I think the thumb rule again here is that diagonals are judged on the basis of engagement. Engagement could be directly done and indirectly done. I mean, indirectly done is like just preemptive rebuttals by opening houses, because opening houses cannot necessarily like deal with closing directly. So what you would want is just closely see as to what is the engagement that has been given by closing houses. Oftentimes you would see that closing houses are just trying to deviate as to, oh, hey, this is not the thing that the debate is about. So you wouldn't like essentially see them like even contesting what opening did in order to just like sideline the entire opening. You wouldn't want to let that happen. So just understand, okay, did they give a response to that? Or if they did not respond to that, did they tell you as to why it is not worth responding in the first place? So again, responses are really, really big thing in order to like just evaluate the diagonals of opening government, closing opposition, and opening opposition and closing government. I think it's just not just responses made in speeches, but it could be just like preemptive rebuttals by opening, but also POIs that are being there. What you need to recognize is that POIs are really, really important and are going to also turn like verdicts when you think that it's really, really close call. Because if opening is essentially offering a lot of POIs, but closing isn't like even responding to it or even accepting it, and is not even responding in their speeches inherently, I think it just shows that they don't want to engage with their material. So in that regard, I think you should also consider as to what isn't necessarily like a good engagement, and therefore you should credit the teams for that, like the opposite teams for that. The last thing in terms of diagonals then is that no, there exists no automatic win because there is a vertical win. What it means is that opening opposition wins over opening government, and then you think that CO extends on OO. So you think that yes, if OO is already winning over opening government, then I think if CO extends on opening opposition, CO should automatically win. That does not necessarily mean that CO would win over, let's say, opening government, because like there is no necessary material for you to actually come to that conclusion. So there's no automatic win just because one team takes it over other, because essentially in British parliamentary, you would want to see as to why one team loses out to each particular team in isolation, rather than like taking into account the other teams while you're judging them. Okay, how do you like basically go ahead and evaluate whip speeches, and what necessarily is not new material and what is new material? I think what isn't new material, and there's something, and this is opposite, I mean, I would just change it later, but I think what is not new material is new defenses to just the idea is it related to the existing argument made by a member? If the answer is yes, just everything after that is going to be like not a new material. For example, new defenses to the already existing argument, new explanation to the previously made argument, new rebuttal to the new rebuttal and new responses, new example to existing argument, new impact, new metrics of weighing and judging, etc., etc. Again, I think one more thing that you need to understand is clarifications of member speech. A lot of times, members would give you a speech, and the other member, for example, member of government gives a speech, but member of opposition misconstrues as to what member of government wanted to say. In that case, as the second speaker or as the whip speaker of closing government, you can give clarification as to what your member meant to say without even it being considered as a new material, because it's just a clarification, and you would want to just make it clear as opposed to what people understood or perceived it to be. But what is new material then is just new issue or new approach to the debate. If something that essentially deviates from the entire nuance of what was the debate in member and just change in terms of what is the debate in whip, I think that is what is considered as new material and new issue, because you just understand, hey, in member the issue was completely different, but in whip speech is just a new issue to the debate. I think that scenario, it would be a new material. But I think you would also need to understand as to what is the difference between knifing and weighing. I think knifing is when you inherently disagree with your opening half, but weighing is when you say that, listen, whatever your opening houses have done, we agree to it. However, we think that our material is more important than what the opening material is, which is why you would want to strategically place it in order to get an upper hand over your opening houses. I think these are the 4 videos that you should for sure watch. Comparing against opening by Hadar herself, but there are other videos by Ending Lee, Macharya. So I mean, all of these are really, really experienced people you should probably watch as to how you should have backup comparisons. Then what should you do as chairs? And this is the last bit of what today's training. I think 4 things that you should do as a chair when you're managing the panel. I think oftentimes not, even if like in my like in whenever even if you have a DEPSOC and even if you have like a good society, you don't know as a new judge as to what exactly are you supposed to do as a chair or what is expected from you. So I think there are a couple of things. One, felicitating the debate. I think you're chair because you're chairing that round, and that comes with a big responsibility of like having like just basic understanding and housekeeping of like, hey, this is the time limit and you cannot speak for 10 minutes straight, right? Or this is the way how you speak in the debates, you shouldn't abuse, right? So it could just like simply look like after speeches, you just remind speakers that listen, take and ask POS. After speeches, just to remind people that listen, be mindful of the kind of languages that you're using. You would want to create like a more like safe space for individuals to go ahead and like speak, which is why the most important thing for you is to go ahead and like felicitate debates. The next thing is managing deliberation, which comes after the debate ends. So I think the idea is that as a panel, you would want to come to a discussion and a result, which means that you would want to manage the discussion in such a way that you reach the result in the first place. So what you would want is that you would want to allow participation by all the judges while you're deliberating, but also like you would want to come up with a consensus judging, which means that all panelists should probably have the same like opinion as to what the verdict is. So obviously, when you don't come to a decision, like a common decision by the end of 15 minutes, you should probably then vote. So during the deliberation, as to when you exactly like how exactly you come up with a verdict, you probably would want to ask the calls from each individual, but then you ask questions specifically towards clashes. So for example, what did you think about like this particular argument by opening government and this particular piece of response by opening opposition? Where do you think, or where are you likely to be like swayed, etc., etc.? So I mean, what you're supposed to do, and this is something which you're as a chair specifically like keep in your mind, is that you only have 15 minutes and you have time constraints, which means that you would want to like set clear expectations with your panelists, and you would want to be very respectful with them, which means that yes, probably you would have to like cut them off during when they're speaking. However, be very respectful and like let them know the reason as to why you're cutting them is not because their opinion does not matter, but because of the time constraint, which means that you would probably want to set things like expectations like, would you like to like sum up as to why you think opening opposition won over opening government in less than 30 seconds? In that regard, I think you would essentially tell them as to this specifically I want from you, and this specifically you should tell me in this amount of time, which basically like leads to a better and more like fruitful discussion. And then lastly is giving oral adjudication. But I think in order to come up with verdict, there are different scenarios that you can actually see. For example, and this is the dream call. One, all of them have same call. So in a panel, if all of you have same call, what you should still do is discuss the verdict and clashes. And because of like obviously as chair, you're marking your panelists, right? But secondly, I think the reason as to why you should always discuss irrespective of the call that is existing, I think it gives you and I think there could be different ways as to why one judge felt opening government won over opening opposition, and another judge felt opening government won over opening opposition, even though you have same verdicts. So you get different perspectives of the panel, but you also understand as to whether what they think was the twisting point or the tipping point of the debate, was it actually the tipping point? So you would get more insights of the reading of the panelists as well. So, and I think this is also important because you as a chair are going to give the oral adjudication, which reflects the majority opinion and majority, like the opinion of the entire panel and not necessarily your own opinion, right? So you would want to like inculcate such opinions in your verdict and in your oral adjudication, and why everybody in panel thought that this particular team won over the other. The second is when you think everybody agrees on like all the call, but if there's this one person who does not. I think the first thing that you need to recognize is not have a superiority complex in your head that this is the right call and this is the wrong call. There exists nothing like a right and wrong call, which